Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Maria Whelan with us today. Maria graduated from University of College Dublin, then obtained her master's in modern literature from the University of Edinburgh. Before joining Inkwell, she worked as a foreign rights assistant at Janklow and Nesbitt and worked at Akashic Books. Maria enjoys a blend of literary and commercial fiction, as well as speculative fiction, horror, and magical realism. She is particularly fond of novels that straddle the cultural divide, and she's looking for books in the fiction and nonfiction space that speak to the current cultural moment or examine overlooked facets of society. Ooh, so we have so much to dive into here. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much, Estelle. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. We met at the Irma Bombach conference, and I remember being in the same room as you, and I was like, who is this person? And so sitting here, I'm just over the moon and grateful.
Well, thank you so much. And I had the same experience with you. So I was like, who's swarming this person? And I was so glad that we got a chance to connect and talk and have stayed connected. And I want to get into, as I do a deep dive into the work and the representations of the agents, and just doing a dive into Publishers Marketplace for your work. There's so many deals that you're striking. You have Water, War, and Peace. It's a MacArthur Fellow and water expert talking about the global history of the role water has played in human conflict over the millennia. So that's something. And then you have a novel about a taxi dancer, about a Filipino farm worker in 1930 San Diego who's implicated in the murder of a dance hall owner and his lover taxi dancer who fights to prove his innocence. So that's novel. That's nonfiction. You have a best-selling author who flees communist China for artistic freedom in 1950s New York, where the protagonist of her play comes to life, and the pair discover McCarthyism and racism rife in New York City's Chinatown, and that's But Travelers Must Be Content. And then you have The Sweet Revenge of Bertrand Berry, about a 12-year-old who, after accidentally reawakening the vengeful spirit of an evil candy maker with his best friend, must save the town from a sugary demise and find the missing townspeople. Such fascinating and diverse genres and topics. And so I have to ask you, do you need to find things that compel you, that you are just salivating to read yourself?
100%. I think so many people after the pandemic picked up a pen and started writing, and every agent has their own kind of beat or interest. But for me, I just follow my heart in terms of I read the first line, I read the pitch, I read the first paragraph, and if it pulls on my heartstring, I'm kind of there. I'm interested, I'm keen. To be a very good agent, or at least at my point in my career, you have to be a bit of a generalist and just be open to things and say yes to things, whether or not it's exactly the genre that you're looking for. You might be surprised and find that, like, in my case, I don't tend to work with a lot of YA or children's writers, but I had a client that wanted to do that, and I was like, okay, let's put on that hat and give this a go. I guess just being curious really helps. Sometimes I'll sign a client and they'll ask, I'm writing this romance novel. Do you think in a couple of years down the line I can pivot to this? And I'm like, if you perfect your craft, what's stopping you?
So something you said, Maria, just struck me. You mentioned several clients who had different ideas or different books. So it feels like you're a career agent. That's what it feels like. Am I on the right path here?
You're absolutely right. Yes. It depends on kind of the agent you work with. But for me, I've had success in finding debut authors, people that have come from maybe this submissions folder who have never had an agent before. And we've had success with their first book, and they have the bandwidth and the hunger to write another one. And I want to be part of that journey. If they are happy with their first experience with me, I'm always keen to kind of be part of the next book and the next book and the next book. But, you know, agencies are different. Some agencies, it's kind of project by project. You have to prove yourself each time, but not at Inkwell, which I'm grateful for.
I love that. So it sounds like you have a lot of wherewithal to decide who you're going to back and how you're going to work with them. And there's a lot of freedom in that. And that's also earned. So
I
you
can,
earned your spot in the sun there.
I hope. Trying every day.
I like that. That's a very understated answer, but to a very factual situation. So, what do you think is going on in the current climate where it comes to agents and people getting agents, and when they get it, shouting from the mountaintop, and then nothing may happen? Like, what is going on out there?
So you've asked a great question, and if I knew the answer to it, I'd be a richer person. No, I think since the pandemic, there are a lot more agents and a lot more writers, and we are losing funding in these smaller presses. And I think there's a lot of change within the publishing houses. A lot of houses are kind of consolidating or taking smaller presses and embedding them into the umbrella publishing house. In a way, I feel like maybe the traditional publishing landscape is shrinking or getting a little bit more lean, but I also think that there's more opportunity now, and for the hybrid structures, Substack has become a huge platform for so many writers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I think that, like, writers, to their credit, are getting a lot more creative and getting their work out there. Yeah, I think there are a lot of hungry agents, and I think I've been told, whether this is the case or not, that there are perhaps more agents now than editors. So now agents are being a little bit more selective. I suppose that's kind of their job. But then there are more avenues for writers to explore, to just kind of rise up.
So are you referring, when you say avenues to explore, writers getting published or having a Substack that becomes popular, which is getting harder now because
Mm,
Substack is not in its early days anymore, where I think it was easier to grab your audience, but it's not
yeah.
impossible, but it's definitely a different climate.
You're right. Yeah, I just mean kind of getting published. Like, yeah, Substack was a great avenue. I think that there are some publishing houses and agents, actually, there are agents here who are looking at publications on Amazon, self-pubbed things that maybe are doing quite well without the infrastructure of a traditional publishing house. And then kind of the likes of us come in and we're like, we can put you through the publishing house path if you'd like, you know, find you an opportunity at a traditional publishing house. Sometimes people say no, though. Sometimes they're like, I'm happy with where I'm at.
This is a change I've seen in the industry, a big change. It used to be very kind of looked down on if somebody self-published because they thought, well, it's not being vetted, it's not having the editorial oversight, you're kind of just doing whatever.
Mhm.
But today, showing strong sales and showing a strong platform seems to be superseding anything else. And particularly when somebody's with a traditional publishing house and they're not the key book, they're not going to get the attention. Maybe they'll get the newest PR person on the team who
Exactly.
is learning on their backs.
I know. I mean, obviously, we love the big five, but people I think are getting creative. And with any process or anything, there's highs and lows and disappointments and things to rejoice about. But
Sure. And do you feel like some agents really just want a done deal? They're like, I know I can sell this, so I'll take it on. And they'll say, I don't know if I can sell this, so I'm just going to hold off now. Are you somebody who's going to be like, you know what? I feel passionate about this and I'm going to try, even if I don't know right now exactly who or where?
you gleaned this from my list of very disparate and unusual sales. Well, my answer will be twofold. I was told by my mentor here that when reading something, it's very good to have an editor or two in mind. If you can think of a few editors as you read, you're probably onto something good. Even if I am extremely passionate about a project, if it's so esoteric, I may not be able to sell it. And maybe it's where I am at my career. I'm definitely willing to kind of take a risk. And if I have the passion for it, I can speak passionately about the project and really try and convince editors that this is something that they need on their list. And it helps that I'm in Manhattan and I can kind of pound the pavements and say, go to a lunch or go for a coffee and be like, listen, this may not be in your wheelhouse, but this is a great. I mean, well, I'll never start by saying that, but I think being an agent, it's so interesting because there's so much knowns, but also unknowns. You just never know what will make a big stir.
And you make a really important point that I think is often overlooked. You're here, you're in the room where it happens, to paraphrase Hamilton, which is the big publishing companies often have their locations in New York or New York adjacent. And so, yes, you can go to those lunches, you can do those networks. And when I look at the printout that I had from Publishers Marketplace, it's so all different places. Lake Union, you have St. Martin's, you have Zibby Books, you have Kensington, you have Steerforth, you have Alcove, you have so many different connections with editors in publishing because of your deals. And I think that's an important thing. People get very excited, and I've talked about this before, they get very excited about having an agent and they announce it without doing their own due diligence and vetting the agent. Does the agent have deep connections? It's the same thing as when you hire a writing coach. Hire a writing coach who has deep connections in the industry, whether with organizations or publications or things that they're doing in terms of education. It's fine to be young and hungry and starting out, but the agent needs to be connected to an agency that actually has those relationships, because anybody can hang up a shingle and say, yes, I'm going to represent you, but let the buyer beware, I always say.
You're absolutely right. What I'm seeing more and more of is I'm on a phone call with a prospective writer and they'll ask for a couple of references or to speak to a couple of my existing authors, which is great. And I like always am happy to connect the two. I never want to say this, but I'm like, of course, I'm going to connect you to my favorite writer, the one that will speak kindly or whatever. But yeah, I think you raise a good point. It's very hard for a writer to know how well connected an agent is. But I think, yeah, Publishers Marketplace is a great place to look.
Somebody can just get a month-long subscription or 6 months, and then there they go. And there are other places, Query Tracker. I don't know if you're on Query Tracker. Not everybody is.
Yes, I am.
And I don't know if you participate with Manuscript Wishlist.
Yes, I recommend everyone and anyone that's in the writing world to take a look at that, because it kind of says it all.
It does.
Of course, I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with it, but it's not only the books that one has sold, but it's also the books that we're like actively seeking out.
They'll say, like, actually, how you have it in your bio. You put it right in your bio, which I think is very clever and very useful, because here it is. You don't even have to have a long interchange. You just, somebody looks at your bio and they know what it is that you're seeking. What does somebody need to know, like in each genre? So let's say nonfiction.
For pitching a nonfiction book or querying a nonfiction book to an agent, well, I think nonfiction, unlike fiction, is, I don't want to say formulaic, but there is kind of a template that kind of most writers should kind of keep in the front of their mind. And that's, you have to have a snappy query. I always kind of sit up when I receive a query where it's directed towards me and not just like the agency at large, because I feel like we get so many submissions, so many, that I think agents, they like their egos massaged a little bit. If they are receiving an email to the whole of Inkwell, we'll probably pass on it. However, if an author gets in touch and is like, I'm getting in touch with you because of X, Y, Z, then I'm like, okay, you've obviously engaged in my list and whatever, and you do actually see me as the right kind of agent for this project. So that I look out for. I think in terms of just the nonfiction project itself, generally you have to have the kind of publicity and marketing details in there, how you are going to help in the efforts to sell your book, especially in nonfiction. I feel like it's important to have somewhat of a platform. And if you don't have a platform, you kind of have to write with the promise of that you will get on the social media platforms and kind of start really making an effort, because sadly that's what's going to help sales. And I think sadly that's what publishing houses want to see, because they want to know that you've a built-in audience. And if you're an expert in your field, the publishing house wants to know that like there are people that already are kind of listening to your advice or your insights. And then you have kind of your bio, you have 2 to 3 chapters, letting the agent and then eventually the editor sink their teeth into the project itself. Not too much. I think a good length for a nonfiction proposal would be like 20 to 40,000 words max. And then your comp titles, I don't know how you feel about comp titles, but they're a pain in the head, but they're necessary, because it kind of signals to the publishing house and to the agent that you've thought about where your book is going to sit on a shelf. Whether the agent reads it and it's like, you're dead right, I do think showing that you've had this thought is very important.
Yeah, it shows the thought behind it. You're diving into your own material and figuring out how you can make those connections, particularly for the agent who is then going to forward that to the editor, and the editor will make the connections. And what I've noticed is a little bit of a trend, and I'd love your input on this. I've seen people not only using comp titles of course, books in the past 3 years, 3 to 4 years, but using TV shows or movies as another way of saying it has the flavor of this. And I think that's very clever, even though it's not book focused, because it's such a visual medium. And if you're inviting a reader into your world, maybe not so much for nonfiction, but certainly for nonfiction memoir or for novels, I think it does paint a picture. I think for like nonfiction service, I'm going to teach you how to, the psychological thing. Yes, you have to have your platform, you have to have your basis. Otherwise, someone could just have an idea about psychology, but if nobody's followed them, then they're unlikely to get a book deal unless they're like a TikTok star, I suppose.
That helps. That certainly helps.
So have you noticed that the using of TV or film in the comp?
I definitely have. I dabble in the horror space, for better or for worse. I definitely have some sleepless nights after reading some of my queries. But I was getting a lot of kind of Stranger Things comps, which we all love. And yeah, that was a big comp a couple of years ago. I think it's good to have one or two comps though that are book comps, just because I feel like at the end of the day, it is a book, but I certainly do. I think that by comping your body of work to a different form of media definitely will signal to the editor that there is like legs for a bigger kind of opportunity, perhaps, maybe eventually in film or TV.
I love that. So what about memoir and what about fiction?
Memoir, it's a funny one. It kind of exists in its own little world because some people will actually query memoir as a kind of proposal, a nonfiction proposal, where it's kind of half written, but the rest is yet to come, but it has kind of all the trappings of a nonfiction piece where it has the chapter outline and the comps and the marketing and publicity ideas and the bio and then the 3 or 4 sample chapters. But then I'm also used to seeing kind of the memoir being fully fleshed out. And I think in my experience and kind of through trial and error, I'm beginning to think that that is actually the way to go, having it fully fleshed out, unless you already have a publishing deal in your back pocket and a recognized name or whatever. But if you're kind of a novice memoirist, it's good to have the whole thing written.
I'm tending to agree with you there.
Yeah. As annoying as it is, because it's kind of like, especially when you see the chapter outline, it's like that should be enough, and the writer knows where it's going to go, and you have a sense of like, as the agent, you're like, I know where you are now, but the editor has not read your whole life story and doesn't know you as intimately, I suppose. So
So you have to kind of do the heavy lifting in that case to go
yes,
to the editor and say, no, they really can deliver, that kind of thing. Whereas if it's done, then the execution is there. It may change later, but so much of it is already fleshed out. And also, I have an idea about that. I think it gives the writer a little bit more control if they already know where it's going to go. It's like somebody can't jump in and say, okay, well, I think it should go in this direction. And you're like,
you're absolutely right. Yeah, the editor can only work with what's on the page. I've yet to see a memoir that starts in one way and then is radically changed. I hope that if you have an editor like that and you're writing memoir, then I think pull out.
smart. What do you think about the trend, or maybe it's not a trend so much anymore, to add prescriptive elements to memoir?
I think that is a great approach. It's funny because I sometimes, for me at least, I do work in the memoir space. I feel like a lot of editors are looking for a memoir that has some sort of universality to it, something that an audience will kind of cling to because they're learning something, and it's not merely a story of kind of like someone was born and somebody died and all these things happened, but like something that you can truly take away. And sometimes I've worked on memoirs where there is no prescriptive through line, and that's actually what is needed. And the weaving in of maybe perhaps not experts in the field in which you're talking about, but kind of zoning out and kind of being like, okay, there are other anecdotes that I can put into my own memoir from other sources to kind of beef this up and make it a little bit more far reaching.
I like that. And it also creates like cultural touchstones, which elevates a project.
Exactly, exactly. I was actually at a conference 2 weekends ago, and there was a memoir discussion, and one of the speakers was talking about how she wanted to write a memoir, and her agent was like, your story is the hanger, and all the other kind of anecdotes and cultural touch points are the clothing that's hanging on the hanger, but the hanger is the kind of connective tissue. And I thought that was a good analogy. I was like,
That's a great analogy. I love
yeah.
that. So what about with fiction? Now, everyone says with fiction, you have to have it fully, fully done.
When you're starting out, or when you aren't kind of locked in to an agreement already, yes, it makes your life and the agent's life a hell of a lot easier if it's already written. There are rare exceptions. If you're kind of a celebrity, if you have an insane kind of social media following, some funny kind of situations work themselves out where you don't have to write the full thing and you might have a ghostwriter. But generally speaking, it is very wise to have your whole manuscript polished and as near to perfect as it possibly can. A good agent will come in and editorially help you to make it as beautiful and polished as possible.
And what about with children's books? I know you don't do a lot of them, but is there a tenet for that?
I think it's also kind of having it all ironed out and all written as well. I think with children's books, there's always that question, if it's an illustrated book, do you bring the illustrator on before the book deal or after the book deal? I think that really depends on the project and kind of the scope of the illustrations needed.
Is there anything that you're craving right now that you're like, oh my gosh, if this came across my email, I would just go get it to me?
I mean, so many things, but one I can think of at the forefront of my mind right now is I spent some time in Scotland and I am terrified of the Loch Ness Monster, but yet I'd love a novel to do with the Loch Ness Monster and the mythology, either around the Loch Ness Monster or kind of a Loch Ness Monster adjacent romance or something weird and wonderful featuring this elusive and mystical beast.
So sort of like magical
Yeah.
reality because the idea of it is very present in society. And by the way, I was in Scotland, I was in Edinburgh, and then the Highlands last summer.
Oh, gorgeous. Gosh, aren't the summers just so long?
Oh my gosh. I have to say one thing, it was July and it was like 60 degrees. I was like, this is so weird. But, and I was thinking I was going to get my hair blow dried because we were going to go to dinner and have pictures and all that. And then I walked out of the hotel and the wind went like this. I said, forget it, no blow dry.
Let nature take its course. I mean, honestly, there's no point. Yeah,
It
it's,
was gorgeous. I loved it. We could walk all over. It was, yeah, it was
you
just so
know,
wonderful. And my husband is a little bit Harry Potter obsessed. And the actual graveyard where J.K. Rowling got the names for her books was actually there. And so we did a Harry Potter tour. And also where she finished the first book, that there was a hotel that she found. They showed us the room.
oh, no way, you did that. That's amazing. That's
Well,
on
he's
the,
obsessed, so
oh,
yeah.
at the end of the bridge, isn't it?
I think so,
The hotel.
yeah. Yeah. It was just a very cool sense of history there. And we did do the Loch Ness tour. Of course, we didn't see Nessie.
Glad.
But
I
I
bet
love
you're
that you want a book about that because there's got to be somebody who has that interest or maybe has something.
perhaps. Who
Perhaps.
knows?
Who
Who knows?
knows? Or maybe there will be now.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you're just really
Craving.
wanting? Yeah.
I think in the non-fiction space, a book kind of delving into OCD will be quite interesting to me. I'm just fascinated by that way of thinking and whatnot, and it's a topic that's kind of close to my heart. And then I've always kind of had this morbid curiosity with funeral traditions, and that also is something that I don't
That
know why, don't know how, don't know. Well, I have a vague idea of why. My grandmother was an undertaker, so I think I've always been kind of close to death in some shape
I
or
had
form.
family members who had a funeral home in Brooklyn.
No way.
Yes, way.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like kind of facing it and being close to it, it kind of makes death less scary.
Yeah, you know what made for me death less scary was my dad dying in March after a
Mm.
long bout with Alzheimer's. But I don't know. I feel this is so weird, but I lost the closeness to him that we used to have when he had the disease because it just saps away the personality, the persona, all that. And him dying and like coming to me in dreams and like I feel close with him again. It's so bizarre.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I suppose kind of the thing that you are most afraid of when it happens, it's kind of you have to rejig your way of looking at things. And I'm sure losing him was a tragedy, but now hopefully.
Yeah. It's a tragedy and it's not because he wasn't who he was. When we lose who we are, life is really not, it's not viable anymore because you're just not there. But this is just such an interesting discussion. Is there anything that you want to share? Anything about the agenting process or the writing process or the proposal process that you can share now?
100%. There are a few things. I think for writers, hopeful writers or writers that are feeling kind of the crippling anxiety and the losing kind of the hope, I think it's a long process and it can be an exciting one, but like truly I've met so many writers who are like, I've only submitted my manuscript to 5 people and I've gotten rejections. Like, should I keep going? And I'm like, absolutely. There are so many agents out there. It's just if you're getting feedback and it's all unanimous and it's kind of saying the same thing, maybe take a moment to pause and withdraw your material and rejig it. But I think just keep at it. And then for anyone that has an agent and signing with an agency, you thought like it's in the bag, we're going to get that big deal. It takes a really long time to sell a book. Even on my side, there's one book that you mentioned when you were introducing me. It took like 2 years and over 40 attempts or 40 submissions, and it finally found a home. Timing kind of is everything. And
Which book was that?
Taxi Dancer.
Oh, Taxi Dancer. Okay.
And it's the same when you have your editor, but like the publishing process, it can be all kind of like go, go, go. And then there can be lull periods. And those lull periods doesn't mean that like the agent isn't doing anything, but it means kind of there are people that are maybe still reading, or maybe everyone that was right for the book has read it, but there will be movement in the industry because there always is. And we might put a press pause on the submission, but then in a year's time go out again with it. Nothing is ever dead in my eyes, unless it's a really, really, really topical nonfiction project that can only be published in a short window of time. But I think, or at least the writers that I've been lucky enough to write with, there's kind of a timelessness, I like to think, with the writing. So it doesn't have to be immediate.
I like that. And I also like today, the backlist is becoming the front list. It
Yes.
used to be like way relegated, but because of all the forums that you can still share your work, it becomes something more. And that's wonderful for writers.
Oh, it absolutely is. And whether you're in control of your backlist or whether the publishing houses and whatnot, I think they're your audience. And, those people that have kind of stuck with you through all your older titles will continue, I think, when you finally get another chance at publishing something new.
I love that. There's always a chance, there's always a tomorrow, and you really just have to stick at it, I feel. It's a marathon, not a race.
Kind of is, although it takes so long. Rome wasn't built in a day and all that jazz.
Yes, yes. Final word of advice. I love your inspirational words. It just really, I think so many writers will take it to heart.
I think one other thing is if you are not in a writer's group, I'd suggest getting together some of your friends or people that you've never met that are like dotted around the country or the globe, because I think writing can be such a lonely process. And as an agent, for me, I can tell when perhaps a manuscript comes my way and it hasn't had enough eyes on it. And I think it really is valuable to have your beta readers and your, not just your mom and your dad and your husband and your wife and your siblings and your cousins read your work, but also people beyond your nearest and dearest. They'll give you the support. Sometimes I go to conferences and they're like, how do we meet agents? And I sometimes think that your writing group is a good kind of in, because if one of your friends or peers or fellow writers maybe get their foot in the door with an agent, there's your referral down the line. Or if not that agent, somebody else in the agency.
I agree. Community is so important, and you just never know where the next opportunity, connection, or chance is going to come from.
Exactly. I've met a few writing people that are in writing groups where they've never met the members, which is amazing and beautiful.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just recently started working with someone in a writing group, and I'm really enjoying it. So
Oh,
the
good.
process is going great.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. This has been fantastic. And I'm going to put where people can reach out to you on your Inkwell's website,
Brilliant.
and they can read exactly what you're looking for in terms of submission.
Thank you so much, Estelle. This has been too much fun, to be honest.
I've loved chatting with you. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.